Hello, welcome again to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. And tonight's going to be a really fun GPP night, especially because you've got the big Midsummer Classic on DraftKings, some smaller Midsummer Classics, of course, as they do also. And you got a Coors game, you've got elite pitching, two things that we haven't had over the past few days, or at least the past 2 days, I should say, because it's been pretty much Kershaw and nobody. Day before it was fit in whoever you feel the least terrible about, but a lot of pitching options tonight, so it should be a fun night. So we'll go ahead and start off with the starting pitchers. Of course, the top pitcher on DraftKings, as he always is, and as Clayton Kershaw was last night, Max Scherzer, very expensive at $14,000. Pittsburgh actually one of the teams that he put up one of his highest totals against this season, 53.7 back on June 20th with the no-hitter, 10 strikeouts. So obviously you're not expecting a performance like that, but you obviously know that he's capable of it, essentially the same lineup that he saw then. So he's certainly in play, big-time upside. Probably won't see a ton of him in cash games because people will want Coors bats. So I think that makes him a low-owns GPP option. I really like him tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Super expensive, like you said. The weird thing is he's only a minus 120 favorite, which is weird with Jeff Locke pitching on the other side. I was kind of surprised to see that. I know Washington's offense hasn't been very good, but I don't know. It just seems like he should be a higher favorite than that.
Yeah.
I definitely think he's by far the best GPP option. Highest upside. The only other guy I would consider up there really is Kluber against the White Sox. I think is a nice play also. He's been a nice strikeout guy, but the White Sox, like we've mentioned a couple times this week already, haven't been a big strikeout team despite not putting a ton of runs on the board. I have both of those guys projected right around 8 strikeouts right now. Obviously, Kluber is a steep discount, especially on DraftKings at $2,500 cheaper. I like Kluber quite a bit. I think he's probably going to be the most popular cash game play if I had to guess. I think he's the biggest favorite on the board today at minus 160 at home. Got to feel pretty good about him. I wouldn't be surprised to see him up there in the 30-40% range on both FanDuel and DraftKings, maybe approaching 50 or so in cash games on DraftKings where you're taking 2 pitchers. So I think he's going to be really highly owned, but Scherzer is probably the better GPP play out of that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that, and like we said, Scherzer, obviously the complete game, shutout, bonuses, all those things definitely come into play on DraftKings, which is probably why guys like him and Kershaw are even more expensive. And Kershaw got those last night, as you saw, so...
Right.
Other elite pitching options, you've got Felix Hernandez, but he's facing Toronto, and he really just hasn't shown a lot of upside recently. I mean, his best start in his last 10 games, or the last 9 games, isn't even 30 points. His 10th game, 10 games ago, when that complete game against Tampa Bay, 41 points. But, I mean, that's not to say he's not a good play, but this is a really tough offense, even against right-handed pitching, even in Seattle. So, I mean, for me, he's a GPP option, but he really doesn't have the ceiling that the first 2 guys that we mentioned have. So, I think he'll be low owns, but I'm not expecting him to go 35, 40 fantasy points against this team, though.
Right. That's about how I feel also. I think that's a good way to look at it. Definitely makes him a solid GPP play, even a decent cash game play. I think at the ownership percentage is what's going to make him a nice GPP play because it's not going to be super high. That's probably... the best thing you can say about him today is that if he has one of those really nice games, which, like, I agree with you, I'm not really expecting one, but it's definitely possible. I think he's going to be so low that it's really going to pay off.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And then a couple middling options here. You've got Michael Pineda at Minnesota. Obviously, Pineda, one of those guys he's hit or miss. When he's bad, he's really bad, but when he's good, he can be dominant.
Yep.
As evidenced by his last 3 starts, 4.7, 24, 32. So he's got his ups and he's got his downs. This is a Twins team. It's the worst road offense in the league, but they're actually pretty good at home. Better against lefties than righties, as we know. But I think Pineda is an interesting option here because, I mean, outside of really just one inning, and that was all just in the third of an inning, really, Garrett Richards had his way with them and pretty much dominated that lineup yesterday. So I think at his price tag, especially $9,000, he's got a pretty good amount of upside tonight.
Yeah, I agree. Hard not to feel pretty good about that. I don't love the price tag for cash games, but since we're talking GPPs here, I mean, it's definitely another one of those lower owned options. I think he'll be a little bit higher owned than some of these other guys we talked about at these inflated prices because he's $9,000. There's not really anyone in that price range other than him that you feel very good about. Jose Quintana is the other guy in that price range that I would look at a little bit. He's facing Cleveland. Cleveland hasn't been great against lefties. They've been a little bit better lately now that they've been mixing in some more righties into the top of the lineup there. So it's not like a home run matchup or anything. I think he's a decent GPP play despite being a pretty big underdog to Kluber. Not a guy I'm targeting like really actively, but I think he's an option. The guy I like the most in the middle today is Cashner. I think he has a lot of strikeout potential against Miami. Miami's offense has been struggling. They're in San Diego. 6.5 run over-under. He's a pretty decent favorite at -135, 7,200. That's probably the guy I'm going to be using a lot as my starting pitcher too if I'm looking to get some bigger bats in my lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, I like that price a lot. He's fairly priced on FanDuel and DraftKings, definitely. I think he's 73 on FanDuel,
Yep.
So he's definitely a guy, by far the best in these guys in the middle, I think, because a lot of these guys are guys you're going to target with bats or guys that just have big time, or we'll say very low floors. I mean, you got guys like Colby Lewis, his floor is negative. Dan Herron doesn't have much upside. John Neese is facing the Dodgers, so definitely just the best guy among those. And as far as cheap options go, there's a couple guys that are interesting. Really, both sides of the Atlanta-St. Louis game for me are interesting tournament options. We saw how bad St. Louis has been against lefties, and there's kind of a exclamation point on that after they just got mowed down by John Danks the other day.
Yeah.
So Manny Banuelos, while he's not a guy that pitches deep into games, he's got not a ton of upside, but did have 24 fantasy points in his first start. He's only had 3 starts. St. Louis, just like we said, just not touching left-handed pitching, so he's an interesting option. But on the other side, Tim Cooney facing a terrible Atlanta offense. He's a sizable favorite at $6,500, cheap on FanDuel as well, right around $6K. So I think he makes for a decent option, but you're not expecting either of these guys to pitch more than 6 innings at best. So don't expect huge things, but considering their price tags, they're decent options.
Yeah, Cooney hasn't even gotten to 6 innings since his first starting at San Diego, but he is averaging 9 strikeouts per 9, which is pretty solid. At his price, I think he's a guy you can definitely look at in GPPs for sure. I'd like it if he was a little bit cheaper than that 6,500 price tag, but I think with the strikeout upside, if he can get to 6 innings or 6 1/3 or something like that and strike out 6 or 7 guys, I think you're going to get a nice value out of him, especially against that weak Atlanta offense. The other young guy that I was looking at a little bit today that I don't know a ton about, I'm probably going to ask Josh about him, honestly, if he knows anything, is Nick Tropiano for the Angels facing Texas today. He's a pretty big favorite at -145, only 6,100. It looks like he had a pretty nice strikeout rate in the minors. Only 24 years old. He's a guy I'm going to look into a little bit more and probably mix in a little bit as a GPP play. Although, like I said, I don't know a ton about him.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about him either, but like you said, I saw those same minor league numbers. He looks like he's had some success in the minors, so maybe we'll get something posted on the message board to have Josh tweet out something about him tonight. But there's one other guy that's cheap, which I'm definitely trying to pick on. Ian Thomas coming up, spot starting for Zach Greinke.
Mm-hmm.
This guy had terrible numbers in the minors, and he looks like a guy that you could pick on. So if you're looking for a cheap stack, which we'll get into hitters now, that we're pretty much done with pitchers, but Ian Thomas just looks like he is just not a very good pitcher. Coming up for this one start, who knows how long of a leash he has. Maybe he's only going to pitch 4 innings or so. But the Mets going to be an interesting, cheap stack tonight against this guy who's... I don't expect him to do much. He's going to be lucky to be in positive points tonight, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, any other pitchers you want to highlight before we move on to...
No, I think we covered all the guys I wanted to talk about.
All right, catcher options tonight. Going to be another fun night. Obviously, your Coors bats, that kind of goes without saying. Nick Hundley at 4K. The red side of things for catchers, I mean, you got Tucker Barnhart's 3K. Brian Pena is 2.8. Both guys right around the same prices on FanDuel also. But neither guy with much upside. Barnhart probably a little bit more than Pena if he's in the lineup. But neither one of those guys you feel great about. I think a guy that I like a lot, and if you're a BVP guy, he's had some success in this matchup as well, Stephen Vogt. He's really cheap, especially on FanDuel, 2,700, 35 on DraftKings. Obviously, in the big ballpark of San Francisco, he loses a little bit of that home run upside, but Jake Peavy's just not a very good pitcher at this stage in his career, and he's been okay in the few starts that he's made, but if there's any one Oakland bat I'm really trying to pick on, I think it's Stephen Vogt.
Yeah, definitely. Jonathan Lucroy is a guy I like quite a bit today against a lefty in Arizona. 3,500 is a pretty good price tag on him. That's probably the guy I'm going to be using most. Outside of that, like you mentioned, I'm probably going to be looking at the Coors bats. I don't mind Brian McCann. against Phil Hughes, who gives up a lot of fly balls. John Jaso probably going to hit first again against a righty. I don't mind him. But, I mean, I'm probably going to look at Lucroy the most, then mix in the Coors guys. Outside of that, there's nobody else I feel great about a catcher.
No, there's one guy I'm going to consider, and it's not even that great of a matchup. Colby Lewis has actually been pretty good against righties, but if Chris Ionetta's in the lineup, he's much better against lefties and righties, but the guy's been crushing the ball recently. He's homered each of his last 2 starts, 3 of his last 5, so he's a guy for cheap you can look to for a little bit of power. All right, first base options. I mean, if we're talking cash games, you want Joey Votto. If we're talking about tournaments, which we are, I like Joey Votto still. Eddie Butler, terrible against lefties, not good against righties either. Obviously, 11-run total in Coors Field. Votto really starting to heat up. I believe he has multi-hit games in 5 of his last 6, 3 of those with 3 hits, showing some power. DraftKings has him priced like it, though, at $5,700. He's $45 on FanDuel. He's my favorite play, but I think a good swerve off him, $100 difference on both sites, is Paul Goldschmidt against Jimmy Nelson tonight.
Yeah, I like him too. Definitely a high price though, and I do prefer Votto also. Mark Teixeira is another guy I like for the same reasons I like McCann. I like most of the Yankees lefties against Hughes tonight. He's a big fly ball pitcher. Ben Paulson's only 3,100. I prefer him in the outfield, so I can still use Votto, but I think he's probably your best value play there. As far as mid-range guys go, Prince Fielder sticks out to me. If you're not using Tropiano, which I can't imagine most people are, 4,300 for Prince Fielder against a righty. And I'm going to be looking at that most of the time.
Yeah, I like that call quite a bit as well. And you can look at Albert Pujols. Like I mentioned, though, Colby Lewis has been pretty good against righties, but Albert Pujols has been kind of on another level recently. David Ortiz against Justin Verlander. Verlander worse against righties, got those reverse splits, but as we know, Ortiz has some power. Verlander just not very good in general, so you got to like that. And then if we're talking specifically FanDuel, because Victor Martinez is a catcher on FanDuel, he's still really cheap, as he seems to be every night, $3,700 against Rick Porcello tonight, so I like him as well. One other option I'll throw out there as obviously a tournament-only option because he is facing Felix Hernandez, but Edwin Encarnacion's only $3,600 on DraftKings. So if you want to chase a home run, we know Felix, obviously not a guy you want to target, but if anyone's got the power to take advantage of a mistake, it's going to be Edwin. So.
Yep.
All right, second base options. Got to like Brandon Phillips, batting atop that order against Eddie Butler on both sides there. Brian Dozier's a guy I just continue to target against anyone. As we know, Pineda, when he's bad, he's really bad. So Dozier, I believe he got the day off yesterday, so should be nice and well rested for today's game as well. I like him as a tournament option. And then outside of those guys, I like Rougned Odor against Tropiano, more so on DraftKings. He's $4,000 on both sites. Obviously, $4,000 is a much better price tag on DraftKings than it is on FanDuel.
Yeah, definitely. The 2 Dodgers guys I like quite a bit against Nice today. Justin Turner, he's a third baseman on FanDuel, but he's a second baseman, third baseman on DraftKings. Howie Kendrick, they're both 3,400 on DraftKings against the lefty. Turner was struggling a little bit against lefties early this year. I think his last 3 games he's just been hammering lefties, though. I think he's hitting .467 against them over the last 3 games. He's been rock solid. So I like both of those guys at 3,400. I think that's a steal there. Then I'll make my obligatory Ben Zobrist mention for the day.
Yep.
He's pretty cheap again on DraftKings, only 3,300 against PV. Obviously, it's a pitcher's ballpark, but for 3,300 with that power upside at second base, I'm going to mention him again, as I do every time I do one of these.
Yeah, and as you should. And like I've been mentioning, we need to mention Robinson Cano because he's been one of the hottest hitters in baseball. So,
yep.
And he's just, much like Zobrist, is underpriced considering his recent production. So I'm really not paying down at second base. We just listed a lot of options, all pretty fairly priced. I don't really see any reason to punt the position because there's
no, I don't either.
All right, third base. Your top 2 guys, I think, pretty much head and shoulders above everyone else. Todd Frazier and Nolan Arenado, whichever guy you can afford. Arenado's $900 cheaper on DraftKings than Frazier, so that kind of makes an easier decision there. $100 difference on FanDuel makes it a tough decision. And right behind them, if I had to go my number 3, it's probably going to be Alex Rodriguez against Phil Hughes, fly ball pitcher. A-Rod's been mashing right-handed pitching this year, so if you're trying to swerve off those guys and you're still paying up, I think Rodriguez is the way I'll be going.
Yeah, Justin Turner, like I mentioned at second base, is probably the way I'm going at third base. He's 3,400 on DraftKings, decently cheaper than A-Rod and Frazier on both sites. That's probably the way I'm going cheap wise. I mean, as far as other cheap guys, there's a couple shortstop, third baseman. There's still minimum on DraftKings. Tyler Saladino, who I mentioned for the White Sox, I think Wednesday, has been pretty solid for them. He hasn't been as good since then, but I think he's reached base in every game he started so far, which is pretty rock solid for a guy that costs 2,000. He also has shortstop eligibility, so that'll segue us over there. But Andrew Romine's the other guy I'll mention, lefty facing Porcello tonight. Porcello hasn't been very good. He's also got shortstop eligibility in his 2,000. I'll probably mix in those two guys if I'm trying to get some big bats and good pitchers in my lineup. I mean, it's too good a value to pass up, really.
Yeah, especially when you can do it at shortstop position. So,
yep.
I'll mention two more guys real quick. Louis Valbuena is in a fine spot. Jeremy Guthrie struggles with lefties. Obviously, big-time power there. That's all you're getting, so he's a perfect GPP play. And then Evan Longoria, cheap, especially on FanDuel, where he's only 2,500. Had a lot of success against Chris Tillman in his career. Actually, 6 home runs off him, 9 extra base hits, and 40 at-bats. So if you're looking for your BBP play, there it is for you. But I think he's a really good play, especially on FanDuel, where he's really cheap. All right, tournament options at shortstop. Troy Tulowitzki is the 4th most expensive guy at DraftKings. Anthony DeSclafani, much better against righties than lefties, but obviously he's certainly still in play. If you're looking at the other side of that, Eugenio Suarez, more expensive than what I'll pay for him on DraftKings, really, outside of a red stack at 4,300, but decent price on FanDuel where you can consider him. And then outside of those two guys, if Marwin Gonzalez is in the lineup, had a great game last night. Once again, switch hitter. Jeremy Guthrie struggles with lefties. If he's in the lineup, he usually bats second, so I like Marwin Gonzalez if he's in tonight as well.
Yep. Let's see. I don't mind a couple of other guys here. Francisco Lindor against a lefty. He's been pretty solid against lefties this year. He's only 3,200 on DraftKings. I think he's 2,300 on FanDuel. There were a couple. Gene Segura, 3,800 against a lefty. I like him quite a bit. Assuming he's hitting at the top of the order, which I think he has each of the last 10 games against lefties, so I'd be pretty surprised if he wasn't. Yep. He's been hitting pretty far down the lineup against righties for the most part. Johnny Peralta against lefty and Banuelos, if you're not pitching him. 4,600 is a little steep on DraftKings when Tulowitzki's only 4,400 there. So that's definitely a GPP play there because he's going to be really low owned because of the $200 increase from Tulo, who, like you mentioned, everyone's going to be on. Outside of that, I'm probably going with one of those two cheap guys I mentioned if I'm trying to save money. $2,000 on DraftKings is just so cheap. They're both 2,200 on FanDuel also. Probably less useful on FanDuel because, like I mentioned, Lindor is all the way down there too for only $100 more. So there's a little bit more talent and better batting order spots you can get on FanDuel than DraftKings.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there. And then moving on to the outfield here, obviously you want to get some parts of the Cincinnati-Colorado game, and there are some interesting ones. You've got Charlie Blackmon, obviously your most expensive one for either team, 5,300 on FanDuel or on DraftKings, 48 on FanDuel. I think he's a great cash game play tonight, especially against DeSclafani. Marlon Byrd, really, really cheap on FanDuel, only $3,100. I think he's one of my favorite outfield plays there, considering, as we know, he's much better against lefties than righties, but Eddie Butler, generous to both sides, so you got to like him. You already mentioned Ben Paulson, and then Dre Bruce, more so on FanDuel, where he's more affordable, but he definitely has some power as well in this game.
Yeah, definitely. One stack that I like quite a bit, I've already mentioned two of the guys at the top of the order for them tonight. The 3 and 4 hitters, Ryan Braun and Carlos Gomez against the lefty and Corbin in Arizona. I like basically all the top 5 guys in that lineup. I didn't mention Aramis Ramirez at third base just because I saw some trade rumors about him this morning, but if he's in the lineup and playing,
he's gone now.
Oh, he is? That's done? Okay.
Back to Pittsburgh.
Oh, I didn't know it was Pittsburgh. That's interesting.
Yep, going back.
Well, it'll be interesting to see who's hitting 5th for Milwaukee today then. Who's been playing third base when he's out?
I believe Matt Dominguez is supposed to be.
Okay, so he might be hitting 5th then. I'm trying to think of who they would hit 5th.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll have to see when that lineup comes out because I really like that stack tonight if they have a 5th righty hitting 5th in the lineup there because the top of the order is all righties right now. They're facing a lefty in a pitcher's park. I like that stack quite a bit as like a contrarian stack from the Coors ones. That's going to be a big target of mine in a lot of these games tonight. Outside of that, Matt Holliday I like a little bit. I'm going to go back to the St. Louis well against a lefty probably, at least for the righties wise. I know that they're not as good against lefties, but a lot of it's because they have a lot of lefty bats. I think the righty bats will come around. Holliday, Peralta, Yadier Molina is probably a guy I'm going to avoid anyway. I'm not going to stack that team, but I think you can get some value out of there.
Yeah, and ran a red truck too. I mean, homered again yesterday.
Yep. Puig I like quite a bit at 3,600 on DraftKings. I think he's pretty cheap on FanDuel too against a lefty in Nice. Basically, any of the Dodgers righties I think you can feel pretty good about. If Alex Guerrero's in the lineup, he's a pretty good value. Although we haven't seen a ton of him in the lineup since Scott Van Slyke got back, who is another solid play. He's probably going to be one of my top plays on both sites. I think he's 2,400 on DraftKings and 2,600 on FanDuel. Can you look up that FanDuel one for me?
Yeah, I think he's 27 actually. But let me get it for you here real quick. 27, yeah.
Yeah, so 2,700 on FanDuel, 2,400 on DraftKings. I mean, that's a steal. If he's in the lineup hitting 5th or 6th, you almost have to play him. He's going to be a huge value play of mine. And then one guy that I think is going to go under the radar today because of the high-priced Coors guys is Lorenzo Cain against the lefty at Casimir today, pitching for his new team. He's 5,000, which is really steep, but I think that makes him a great GPP play.
Yeah, I like that as well. Couple cheap guys here. John Mayberry hits lefties really well. That's really the only thing he does. He's min salary, 2,200 on FanDuel, 2,000 on DraftKings. He's a guy I'll be using as a cheap filler in my GBP lineups there. Definitely. If Kike Hernandez is in the lineup again, he's only $2,200 on both sites, so I think that's an okay option.
Yeah, at shortstop too on DraftKings.
Yeah, good point.
So, I mean, the problem with the Dodgers is I just never have any clue what their lineup is going to look like.
There's no rhyme or reason to it at all.
Day. No, I mean, and they have so many like righty bats that come off the bench that they can't even play all of them against lefties. It's just such a mess. But yeah. I mean, that's definitely, as usual, going to be that lineup we're waiting on probably. Because I'm not going to be able to build my rosters until I know who's in there, because that's where a lot of the value is today, especially in the outfield. So that should be an interesting lineup when it comes out, and it's going to make a huge difference for my teams. Josh Reddick is another guy I like quite a bit today, facing a righty in PV, 3,700. You mentioned Vogt. I think Reddick is another option that's really similar to him in the outfield. There's one other Ryan Rayburn is my other cheap guy. He's 2,200 on DraftKings. I want to say he's 2,300 on FanDuel. Facing a lefty, I mean, I play Rayburn all the time when he's in that situation. I think you can get some real value in the outfield today and be able to load up on Coors and some good pitchers outside of the outfield and feel pretty good about some teams.
Yep. Yeah, I'm of the same thing. I mean, we highlighted quite a bit of guys there for you in the outfield that are cheap, so... All right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.